Well, in King Charles's case, it was his first time, but
Right.
third time since 1977 in Canadian history where we had a monarch to visit and give the throne room speech
Hmm.
to open up the 45th Parliament,
Hmm.
right?
Yes.
And so on the Quebec side, the Quebec Liberals are having a leadership race. Okay, there's five candidates. The five men are vying to be the next leader and then the next premier of Quebec at next year's provincial election. One of the interesting things that happened literally that same day, which was all over the news, and we're going to talk about it today, is how basically the Parti Québécois leader Plamondon, alongside with Québec Solidaire, proposed a motion to cut all ties of from the monarchy when dealing with the Quebec state, or the Quebec nation, I should say, if we want a literal translation from French. So
Hmm.
let's
Hmm.
remember in December 2022, a law was literally adopted, and this was not just a resolution, okay, that made the oath of any M&A optional,
Hmm.
right?
Optional.
And it
Yeah.
actually passed through with
Not
success
legal,
on
but
the Parti Québécois
yeah.
side, who did take a
Right.
stand and refuse to take the oath to the head of
Sure.
state, who is still King Charles. Quebec Solidaire at the time went much, much further and I would say extreme. And they also
Mm.
said, let's put an end for Quebec to stop funding the lieutenant governor. So the lieutenant governor is the crown's representative on the provincial level. Okay.
They also went so far as to call the royal family a parasite, which is
Oh,
another
yeah.
story from Quebec
Yeah.
Solidaire.
So let's just remember that even though they proposed to stop funding, the salary of the lieutenant governor has always been and continues to be paid by the federal government. And
Right.
what's really interesting is on the day of the king's visit to make, you know, to demonstrate
Yeah.
national unity throughout the country and to take a real
Yeah.
stand against, let's face it, the constant threats of Donald Trump. What do
Yes.
we do here in Quebec in terms of the legislature? Well, we had quite a surprise hurrah, I would say.
Mm.
I would argue it not in a good way either. Basically, there was a motion among the 106 members of the National Assembly that were present, because usually there's
Yeah.
125 seats in Quebec. They all
Yeah.
unanimously voted in favor of this, cutting all ties
Yes.
of the Quebec state from the monarchy. So, what are your two
Yes.
thoughts about this?
The first thought is what, and then the second thought is complete bluster. Let's face it, Quebec, whether it likes it or not, has a Westminster system, and this Westminster system, along with the legal system, even though it's the codified law opposed to the common law, has a boss, and the cork in that, like as I mentioned in another segment, in that bottle is the crown. There is two things I want to make clear about that as well, because there was once a very famous phrase that was going around that we're something, get used to it. So until we change that something and something, they're gonna have to just simply get used to it. Now, why is this important? Well, I find it important because I find it a little disingenuous, to say it lightly. We have a constitutional monarchy. The constitutional monarchy works. It is an integral part of all of our provinces, and including the federal government. And in the moment where the king has made a presence in the country to read the speech from the throne, they found it opportune to make not a political statement, because I would call this an opinionated statement over what they think of the monarchy. I don't mind them making these sort of statements, but when you make it on the day that the king's visit, at such a high moment of our national identity and sovereignty, I could go on forever talking about it. But what it comes down to is simple bad
I
taste.
Yeah, that I would say it's very well timed, or probably it's the opportune time, right? Just like having an election federally. So here is exactly what Paul St-Pierre Plamondon, the Parti Québécois leader, who's leading in the polls at the moment, by the way, said to reporters. Carney's best card is Charles III, a monarch from another country based on a colonial tradition that is oppressive to Francophones and First Nations. He
Wow.
added, it's out there, it's so
Wow.
abnormal, and of course, from a Quebec standpoint, it's not acceptable. If you think or anyone else here thinks that Donald Trump will stop saying things that are either random or hostile to Canada because Charles III was giving a speech today, I don't know what game you're playing right now. It just does not make sense. Interestingly enough,
First,
let me just add one more
yeah.
point. The Quebec Liberal Party's interim leader, Marc Tanguay, said he's not a fan of the monarchy either, but he also noted that abolishing the post of lieutenant governor requires a constitutional amendment, which is no small order. And he said, quote, when I wake up in the morning, I'm not thinking about King Charles III. My allegiance is to the people of Quebec.
Okay.
End of quote. So is anyone right? Do you agree at all with what
Plamondon
one
is
of these party leaders said?
I think it's just the classic. I mean, it sounds like he's an individual who clearly doesn't know history and clearly doesn't know what he's talking about, and finds himself with a handful of spaghetti throwing at a wall or a ceiling or a fan and see what sticks. Now, why do I mean by that? Because didn't you find it rich how they're saying that the monarchy doesn't represent anything about our culture or our constitutional responsibilities? And when it comes to the Indigenous people, first of all, if he knew anything about Indigenous history, he would know if he should have a conversation with any of the chiefs in any of our territories. Excuse me, I'm talking right across the country, that their conditions and their treaties are with the crown and it is sacred. So that's not something that he should talk about lightly. Further to that, if he wants to talk about independence, because as it's still part of the Parti Québécois platform, in which they're talking about taking Quebec out of the Canadian Constitution, and yet still talking about the old colonial system of the monarchy within Canada, and on the same breath they're talking about taking out the Indigenous people or bringing them along into this new independent Quebec without their consultation. He's got something coming, because one thing I do know, if the Cree of James Bay and the Ganasataki and the Mohawks of the Haudenosaunee, the first thing they're going to say is, hold on a second, I didn't vote to separate. So all in all, I find his statement rich.
Well, I also find you're talking about Plamondon, by the way, the Parti Québécois leader.
Parti Québécois, that's right, correct.
Yeah. So just to add to that, so I find it very rich, by the way, from Plamondon, since literally most of his policies would, in fact, be based on colonial traditions, I might add.
No kidding.
Right.
100%.
So one of the interesting things that I've noticed is Marc Tangay's statement, the current interim leader of the Quebec Liberals. And by the way, I did work for the party in the past, and I do think that this caucus, 19 of them in fact, is full of people who are quite qualified, and I actually do like them, right, on a personal level.
Okay.
Now, putting my analyst hat on, the statement of Marc Tanguay is like, okay, so I'm not for it, but I'm also not against it. But yet, 19 Quebec Liberals are MNAs in this National Assembly. 16 of them were present for the vote, with the exception of, and I have the list over here open, and I'll share the screen too for folks. So 3 of them that did not partake in this vote are Marois Risky and Madoua Cadet. Both of them are on maternity leave, so they were not present for obvious reasons. And Benjamin Franz. So these were the 3 that were not present for this vote. So I guess the question is, why did they all have to vote unanimously rather than abstain, even though they know it's already going to pass, let's say?
Yeah,
Why actually fall into the trap set by the opposition leaders in terms of strategy? Or do you
100%.
think, yeah, or do you think that Marc Tanguay and the Quebec Liberals actually went along with this because there's more important things to worry about, rather than take a stand and not protect francophones in Quebec and Quebecers in general?
There's two ways you can look at this. One, it makes absolutely no difference on any legal standing, or will change anything in the future from a standpoint of procedure. Okay, so vote for it, not vote for it. You could look at it and say, who cares? The second part is you could look at it from another point of view and say, wait a minute, you're the only Federalist Party left that is part of your platform to be Federalist, and you're not even abstaining. Well, if that doesn't say you're lacking in the courage department, then I don't know what does. So you're either taking this not seriously, which you should say that, or you are taking this seriously, at which point I'd say, what kind of a Federalist Party are you then? What are you Federalists for? We are a constitutional monarchy in a federally constituted system, of which you are a supporter for until it goes up to the crown. It's confusing.
So yeah, I share most of that sentiment. In fact, let's just show folks what the welcome our next guest, Mr. Bruno Chieco, who is the Quebec Liberal Party's Youth Wing's regional president for Montreal West. He wrote immediately after, I must say I'm significantly opposed and dissatisfied with the PLQ's decision to support the PQ motion severing ties with the monarchy here in Quebec. I understand Quebec is a unique and distinct society in the Canadian Confederation, but the gravity of our times requires bold action and support from our partners, domestic and international.
Mm-hmm.
And then he goes on to say, I believe the vote today betrays the PLQ's federalist principles, very
Agreed.
much in sync with what you were sharing with us. And aligning yourself with a separatist party's motion is in itself disastrous.
Agreed.
More to come. So welcome, Bruno. How you doing today?
How you doing? Thank you for having me here. I appreciate that.
Alrighty, so let's just remind folks of the tweet that you posted as regional president.
Yeah.
And then, we talked about the rest of the tweet, in which you say, quote, I believe this vote today betrays the PLQ's federalist principles, and aligning yourself with a separatist party's motion is in itself disastrous, end quote. So do you think there was a use to this vote in particular, in this motion? And why do you think the Quebec Liberal MNAs did not abstain or even vote nay against this motion?
It's tough. It's tough. It's really tough to approach this because there's so many different possibilities to explore, and I'm not in the head of these M&As. And I'll start with your second question. But, a lot of Quebecers are against the monarchy, which I do understand. I can understand because Quebec in itself, and as I mentioned in my post, it's a unique and distinct society within the Confederation, within Canada, and we have to acknowledge that, and that's the reality of things. That's fine, but we have an issue, and the issue is that we have a hostile U.S. president, Donald Trump, who continues to infringe on Canadian sovereignty, and right now, what is the strongest proponent of Canadian sovereignty other than Canadians, other than the new election mandate that the federal Liberals have received, and that would be the King of Canada, who is our head of state, who has all these connections with different Commonwealth nations, whether it be the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, whether it be Australia, whether it be New Zealand. These nations are independent from one another, but they each have their respective head of state who acts in his respective capacity in each of his different quote unquote realms. So I look at it and I look at the motion yesterday and I ask myself, I go, why didn't they abstain? Okay, or why didn't they vote nay? I can understand, a lot of Quebecers are against the monarchy. I understand that. But now's not the time to just look at that aspect, although it is important. The people's will is always important. But it's to look at Canada as a whole. It's to look at the country and what's happening to the country right now. It's continuous attacks on our sovereignty. And the person who promoted our sovereignty, the person who defended us, the person who gave the throne speech for the first time in nearly, 60 years, was our head of state, King Charles. So I could understand. I think that maybe they would have voted for that motion because of polling and because the consensus, or at least a majority of people in Quebec, support the abolition of the monarchy. But is it the right thing to to take and support a motion of a separatist party when you, on our own party, the PLQ, is a federalist party? That in itself is contradictory and counterintuitive.
So I do think courage is best demonstrated through action. And
Yeah.
in this case, it was quite different. The action was really not in tune with the raison d'etre of our, in fact, the oldest party in Quebec history, I might add.
Yeah.
And at a time when we were looking for a Captain Quebec or Captain Canada, so to speak, figure in our leadership race,
Yeah.
the one thing that did unite us is our survival as a country versus the consistent threats of domineering Trump. Okay.
Yeah.
And I do think it was really ill-timed, literally
Yeah.
the day of the king's visit on top of that.
Yeah.
Like it could have, waited a month, or something like that. And it's not one of the
Absolutely.
top 10 priorities of Quebecers either.
I agree.
And one of the things that really surprised me is how everyone, not a single nay vote, was registered or took place. Basically, you share that exact sentiment. At a time of national unity, this should not be the stance of the only Federalist Party left. Well, of course, there's the newly formed Quebec Conservative Party as well, that I do think is still for
My
federalism as well, last time I checked.
my stance
So,
on that one can also double-edged sworded. What's good for the
mm,
goose is good for the gander. So I am not. I will always stand up to any sort of Quebec bashing. But that also means that I'm not going to respect anyone that's going to be doing any other Canadian or provincial bashing outside of Quebec as well. Meaning a Quebecer that's going to be Canada bashing or province of Ontario bashing for that matter. I think it's cheap and it's uncalled for. But even when it's coming from the National Assembly, it's almost embarrassing. It 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 kind of says, well, we're chewing on the hand that feeds us. Now, don't get me wrong. You can have an opinion on the royal family. That's fine. But what if, for example, you're making fun of the institutions that hold us together, which is the crown. We have our own crown. The crown represents our institution that everything is stemmed from our legal system to our Westminster system. So to come out and on the same day that the king has made a presence in Canada and to have this vote, which is clearly an opinion, it's just there's just no other better way of saying it other than I think it's wrong, and I think they know that. So the better question is, what's your motivation? What are you trying to do? It almost looks like the tantruming baby. The attention's not on Quebec today, so we're going to tantrum out while the king is here. Could that be a question?
and also, it's through actions that you show whether or not you agree with the monarchy, right? So you don't have to be left or right ideologically in order to demonstrate that. Is this a sign of the Quebec Liberal Party's lack of courage, or rather their abstinence, right?
That is an
Or do you
excellent
believe this
question.
was, in fact, them demonstrating that taking a stand matters to Quebecers, whether or not it is something you agree with?
Well, then, if this was something that they don't agree with, you should take off your platform that you're no longer a federalist leaning party. call yourself a Nationalist Quebec Party for that matter. But if you're Federalist, you're making this very confusing.
Now, is this actually what Quebecers are aching for among our political party leaders? And I would say, someone who does not cave to separatists because they know where they stand, rather than give a very nuanced, mixed, typical politician answer and succumb to public pressure, or in this case, the Legislative Assembly's pressure, would have been much more demonstrative of leadership, in my view. I echo the sentiment you just mentioned and discussed. And we're also at a time where Quebecers are really looking for someone. We don't need to label them as a populist, but because all the 5 candidates are male of the party, who is a man of the people, who will go against the status quo. And this would have been an excellent method for a specific leadership candidate to differentiate and position themselves as the true leader who's running for the leadership of the party and premier
who are you
level.
referencing? Who are you referencing here, man?
Well, to my surprise, none of them actually did. But this would have been your opportunity to do it.
Absolutely.
Literally, this would have been the most opportune moment to do it.
Well,
And
I
I still have not seen any evidence of that. In fact, almost 5 of the candidates, I think, still have a very nuanced, mixed message, rather than be proud to be Quebecers and proud to be part of the Canadian federation that we have. And this would have been an excellent method, by the way, just like the Paul St-Pierre Plamondon has done artfully in the last 2 years. That's what made him segment himself and lead the polls right now, standing up for Quebecers in terms of language rights, immigration, and the independence, even though it would bankrupt us within the first year, I might add. So this would have been the best opportunity to position ourselves in terms of having national and Quebec pride, and rather switch the focus to a much more populist message, and to actually start talking about what young people are struggling with, as well as seniors, as well as middle-aged Quebecers, and increase the high-level paying jobs, and lower the cost of living, and lower the prices that are charged by large and greedy corporations. This would have been the best moment to do that, and segment themselves at the last stage of the campaign, because the voting actually starts on June 9th of this year, to do that as their final get out the vote message. But I'm quite surprised none of them took the opportunity. Maybe they should have hired us on their teams, I guess, at that point. So in essence, what do you think Quebecers are looking for in the Quebec leadership, Quebec Liberal Party's leadership race candidates, and what are Anglophones actually looking for, or is it the same thing, in your view?
So if we look at, I just like to start off, if we look at the last federal election in itself, the one that just passed, a majority of Quebecers voted for Federalist parties. Okay, so that's number one. And we know that if I'm not mistaken, about a third of the PQ's base are Federalists, and they're just sort of parking their vote there, quote unquote. So let's look at the PLQ. And from my point of view, I think that Quebecers are fed up with long wait times in hospitals, fed up of not having a family doctor, fed up of higher cost of living, the affordability crisis, particularly in terms of housing. I think these are the real issues that we're talking about. We're talking about, what was the number, 800 or 900,000 Quebecers per month using food banks? Does that make sense? We're in Quebec, we're in Canada, we're in a G7 country, we're in one of the richest countries, most prosperous nations in the world. We're more worried right now about separation. We're more worried about the abolishment of the monarchy.
Abolition of the monarchy, yeah.
Our abolition of the monarchy. That's what we're worried about right now. This is what frustrates me. So I think people in general, whether it be PLQ voters or not, they're looking for the bread and butter issues. They're looking for what can help them afford to pay their bills. Well, who can help them? Sorry, who can help them afford to pay their bills? Who can help them go see a doctor? Who can help them obtain a family doctor? Who can help them with the hospital wait times? Who? And none of the candidates, from my point of view, are showing any of that. None of the candidates from my perspective, are showing this. How do I put this? This raison d'être, this flame, igniting the flame. Now, don't get me wrong. A lot of people know who my candidate was up until a certain point, but right now,
For our listeners, would you mind sharing that, or
yeah,
watchers?
absolutely. So it's the former federal cabinet minister and former mayor of Montreal, Denis Coderre. He inspired me. I think a lot of his ideas, none of his ideas were focused on the overtly social issues, if you will, but more how to help families here in the now, how to help people here in the now, and focusing a lot on the bread and butter. And I think that's what people really care about right now. And the only PLQ candidate that I see maybe clashing a bit with, the status quo right now,
Hmm.
and it's
Who?
funny. It's Charles Milliard. I'll be honest
Ah,
with you.
why is he clashing with the status quo?
I think he's a little different in the sense that there's a lot of people, when you speak to him, you talk to him, I think people are moved. I think he's new to politics, but I see not as much, and I don't think it's. I think he's going to have some trouble because there's obviously a front runner and a runner up right now in this leadership campaign, but I think he's the one who could have the opportunity to make a difference. Maybe not now, but in the future. And I'll say this: my post from Twitter. Funny enough, guess who liked it because I posted it on my Instagram story. You won't believe who liked it.
Who?
Charles Milliard,
Was he
the
the only
ra-
candidate?
the
Well,
only
also, it's
candidate.
someone operating his account, by the way. So,
Potentially, but he messaged me this morning privately, so I don't know, but it definitely. I mean, look, no other candidate did that. No other candidate liked it. I got some flack
maybe
actually
they
from.
will after this.
Well, maybe, but point being, I got a lot of flack today too. I think, but it was a shot to the party. That's what it was, and the
Well, it
fact
was
of
a
the
shot
matter.
to everybody, actually.
Well,
What occurred?
Well, I mean, we're talking about a Federalist Party voting in favor of a motion presented by a Separatist Party, which will be our main rival in the next election.
And the
People
main
are
issue.
looking, and well, there you
One of the
go.
main issues, yeah.
There you go. I mean, look, it's not going to be CAC versus PLQ next election. That's not going to be the race. It's going to be the Separatists versus the Federalists. And if the Federalists side with the Separatists, what do we have left? We abandon our base, we abandon our values, we abandon our principles by doing that. And I'm not saying that's what
And
happened.
people lose the most confidence, by the way, in candidates or leaders or parties who actually abandon their own principles, by the way, as
Well,
consistently evidenced by history.
well, that and I 100% agree. And I'm not trying to target the M&As or trying to target the party. I'm just trying to say how it looks, if that makes sense, right? I'm trying
Mhm.
to call a spade a spade. And the fact is, anyone who looks at this, you could look at either someone messaged me and that person told me, oh, like you shouldn't be going saying this publicly. And I told them, I go, listen, I go, first off, I have the right to. I go, I have the right to say it publicly. I go, and I'm from Montreal West, right? The CJPLQ regional president from Montreal West. So who am I representing? I'm representing a lot of Anglophones, a lot of allophones, staunch Federalists, anti-separatists to the max. That's who I'm representing. At the youth level, yes, but within those constituencies, within the party, that's who lives in this region. So it's also in that regard my duty to make sure that they're being heard. And a lot of people aren't not brave enough, but maybe not comfortable speaking publicly either. I don't care to speak publicly. I don't care to call it what
Clearly.
it is. I'm calling a spade a spade. No, I'm calling a spade, and I'm saying it how it is. I mean, look, guys, we have an election next year. We have a leadership race right now. And the only thing that's going to dominate the headlines locally is that the Federalist Party, which is the Parti Libéral du Québec, voted in favor of a motion presented by the Separatist Party, the Parti Québécois.
And we're also at a time in the political sphere where the separatist vote is going to be divided next year during the election, right? And currently polls are showing that the Quebec Liberals are in second place tied with the CAQ, or there's a 1 point lead in another poll. So the separatist votes are going to take and divide their own votes. So should we, as Quebec Liberals, let's say, try to differentiate ourselves by positioning still as a completely or semi-federalist party? Do you think that should be the way to go during this leadership race and afterwards?
I really don't see. Okay, from my political point of view, every party in Quebec has the one thing that they're identified with. We've got the Quebec Solidaire, that they are very sovereignist and leftist. We've got the Parti Québécois, where everybody knows is all about referendums. The Conservative Party is non-existent, I think, and the party that has taken over what we consider conservative and yet nationalist is the CAQ. Well, okay, so where does that leave the Liberals? In my opinion, if they take away the fact that they're a federalist party, they're not really much of a party anymore. Not with any sense of identity in Quebec in any case. That's my opinion.
So about Quebec Solidaire, by the way, it's actually ironic, their name.
Yeah.
Solidarity means everyone is in it together, right?
Yeah,
So
well,
it's actually a great contradiction in its name in this case.
Solidarity only of our own.
Funny enough.
It
Yeah.
was born of a union drive.
So we're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about further with the Quebec Liberal Party's leadership race. What are Quebecers really aching for? Number one thing I wanted to mention in conjunction to what you said, and it seems to be my word of the day, conjunction, I've noticed. The most recent poll shows that Quebecers being in favor of separation is actually on a downward trend. It used to be 38% from the February Léger poll, I believe, and it went down right before the federal election to 28%, which suggests that the separatist movement is not on the rise. In fact, people are preferring stability and certainty rather than much more instability, as evidenced by our neighbors to the south. And people are actually aching for someone who's got the cojones in this case, because the 5 leadership candidates are male, right? To actually challenge the status quo, right? So they're looking for someone who will speak truth to folks. I myself in the race, I'm still undecided. I'm leaning towards 2 people. I do think that, well, look, I actually have liked Charles Milliard's debate performances. I do think, though, he's going to have a tough time with dealing with the Quebec Liberal caucus. Further down the line, because if this election was 2 years, 3 years from now, he would have sufficient of a transitionary period to make those necessary changes happen within the party structure and all that stuff. But there isn't enough time. It's literally next year. So that's my concern. I preferred his debate performances so far. And the other one is I'm kind of torn for second choice, to be honest, right now. So my first and second choice can easily change between 3 folks. And they're the ones who are leading in the polls, I might add, even though there's a huge difference in the polls. And I'm of the opinion always, and as an election officer, I've always said this, only polls that matter are the ones on election day, right? So another thing that I wanted to mention is in response to the consistent efforts by the opposition leaders to always divide us, and Dominique Anglade, the previous Liberal leader, did consistently mention that, yes, it's all about division, François Legault, yes, and independence on the Plamondon side. And we're at a time when people don't want more uncertainty and more deficits. We're at a time when people are living paycheck to paycheck. We're worried about putting food on the table and feeding our family members, or in my case, my senior parents. We're worried about, do we actually keep living like this in this province or in the city, or do we emigrate? In fact, most young people, and ever since COVID occurred, have emigrated and not immigrated. Emigrated. I think that should be the issue on Plamondon's platform, really, since he consistently talks about immigration, right?
Yeah.
And housing, because people like in our generations are either moving to another province in this country, preferably in the Atlantics or Alberta, or in the United States of America, particularly in Florida or Nevada. Okay, so I think those are, because we're all yearning to have better paying jobs as folks in the labor force, and paying a lot less. And I just wish that someone who had a much more populist approach, with cojones, I said before, to challenge these monopolistic industries or large corporations who continuously use the excuse that it's inflation, so we have to raise our prices, even though it's to deepen their pockets, to put much more control measures in terms of pricing on housing, specifically by developers, okay? And be much more strict with the entities or organizations that the government does subsidize. Rather than having this laissez-faire approach. Okay, we're just a silent investor, have a nice life. And then they fail, like the Northvolt battery plant, for instance. Sure, that was federal mostly, but you get the gist. So I think that's what we're aching for. We've had enough, especially in Quebec, of the typical politicians who just talk the talk and don't walk the walk, as we say. And the excuse is, yes, bureaucracy takes a long time. It's the same thing with passing a bill. But I think we're at an age, and we saw with the King's visit, we're at an age of, we want more unity and much more stuff to get done for people, rather than nothing being done, and nothing that is too much based on the issues of the past and independence. Because history has shown whichever party consistently focuses on independence, they have a losing trend, as evidenced by Pauline Marois in 2014, when Pelado rose his fist and said, we're going to stick with our own country. And then Pauline Marois, throughout the campaign, she sort of straddled and doubled down, actually, on that stance. She kept saying, we need our own passport, we need our own citizens, currency, our own military. I was like, wow. I think we're going to...
She doesn't understand how economics works, eh?
Well, on top of that. But also, I hope Plamondon keeps talking like this, because I'm hoping that the other party leaders challenge him on that, as well as our fourth gatekeepers, the journalists in our media institutions, consistently trap Plamondon in questions about this, because history does repeat itself.
Okay, so first and foremost, I've spent a lot of time of my adult life in Quebec. I've gone between Ontario and Quebec my entire life, and I would say that there is a complexity of what Quebecers want, and it does seem to feel like a pendulum that goes left to right from time to time. And I truly feel that the pendulum is moving again in a different direction, away from the CAQ. I say this because we have an existential threat that is shaping our policies from the federal to the provincial level, and one of those policies right now is energy independence, economic independence. What Quebecers are looking for is which party is going to steer us in that direction. Now, what do I mean by that? Which party is going to, and I know this is going to sound weird, is going to be able to get the most out of our federal system financially, and in terms of projects, and in terms of cooperation, that's going to lead us out of the Trump era. That's what I think Quebecers are looking for, and you can actually see that in the polls. Now, I can honestly also say that although Legault has danced with this, he hasn't capitalized on it. So there is an open window for the Liberal Party in order to make gains in that area, and they can do it very well. Why? Because they're traditionally Federalist. So what better party to get more out of the Canadian Federation than the Federalist Party? They have a lot to gain out of this. So with that in mind, do any of these, your question was, do any of these leaders, or have they done anything bold enough? The answer is no. I don't think anything has been said yet that says, as the British would say, been sexy enough to pay attention to. They're there talking about issues that after a couple of debates, I would say turned out to be an absolute bore. That's my opinion. But I mean, as many Quebecers would probably share my opinion, they're probably bored out too. So we're still left with the fundamental existential question: what do they stand for? I don't know how to answer that question. Do you?
So, given that we're noticing our candidates running for the Quebec Liberal Party's leadership race, playing it too safe, which was sort of the sentiment you echoed, I did too. Should we actually look for an attack dog who will be our opposition leader and then launch us into the election? Or should we look for someone, for the next year till the election occurs, who's ready to govern and be premier material?
Let me ask you a question.
A question to my question. Okay.
What happened to the attack dog who was running for leadership of the party?
Well, which one are we talking about?
We know which one we're talking about.
You have to mention it because
Mr.
people
Coder.
are, huh?
Mr. Coder.
Well, look, I'm thinking more of federal and also Marc Tanguay, who's the interim leader. I do think he's a good attack dog. I'm actually surprised he's not running. I would have liked to see him in the race, by the way.
Okay, but
it would have made it entertaining. Because I actually think humor works in politics. And, so, if you want to call a spade, I do think having humor is someone you want to have a beer with. So I'm actually surprised Marc Tanguay is not running. Maybe in the future. I don't know. Is that a direct endorsement? Let's not say that. Okay. But look, in 2015, Tom Mulcair was leading in the polls. He was the opposition leader, and he was, according to even Brian Mulroney, he was the most effective opposition leader. I agreed.
Yeah.
And then he didn't embrace the role of attack dog. He played nice at the first debate, and it was a very awkward debate performance.
Yeah.
Fast forward to what happened this year, literally a month ago at the election. Pierre Poilievre is a very good attack dog. In fact, it's been his career shining moment, actually, in the last 2 years, attacking Justin Trudeau. But when the former prime minister was no longer there, he had a hard time adapting and readjusting his campaign message. So is that what we should look for? I think you need a combination of both. And I think you were mentioning what happened to Denis Coderre. Well, look, I mean, I don't think they're connected. I do think it was a mistake, but I still do think there's a future. We shouldn't count Denis Coderre completely out of Quebec politics.
I can confirm that, my friend.
Right. So I do think there is a lane. I actually wouldn't be surprised if Denis Coderre didn't make his own party right now till next year. And take votes away, of course, from the Quebec Liberals and the Conservative Party of Quebec. Who knows?
Well, let me say something. I'm going to say something.
Well, that is the only way to say it. Otherwise, you're thinking of the word think.
No. Let me say something, okay? And I'm going to go back to your original question. Attack dog, playing it safe, someone who's ready to govern. None of the 5 candidates right now are attack dogs.
I agree.
Okay.
Well, actually, maybe I sort of agree. I think the one person who would definitely be, well, he's also he doesn't have much to lose because he's the long shot candidate, Mario Roy. I actually think in all the debates except for the first one, he's been the attack dog.
Oh, but he's attacking one person in particular.
Well, yeah, I think you should attack the front runner. Let's be honest. Just look at history and politics, right?
Yeah, but let's just take a step back
Hmm.
because none of them are going are attack dogs, and none of them, at least right now, are ready to govern. That's my belief,
Okay.
and I'll elaborate. Pablo Rodriguez is lucky that Justin Trudeau's not there, but he's still heavily associated to the Justin Trudeau era. Carl Blackburn, known, but not to the extent that would be liked. More popular in the regions, perhaps, but not enough to form a government. Charles Milliard has some good ideas, has business experience, medical experience, good experience, but no political experience at all. Marc Bélanger, I'll save the commentary, and Mario Roy, too fresh into politics, and even then, not a trying to be an attack dog, but looks like your uncle D you want to give a hug to.
Okay. I actually am liking Carl Blackburn at the moment as well. I do think, look, people are looking for stability, not craziness. Otherwise, we would want to have our own Donald Trump, right? So I don't think people need that right now, a total disruptor. And I don't call Mario Roy a disruptor, by the way. That's not what I meant. But I have said before in a previous episode of our podcast that whenever you're noticing a frontrunner who's got more than 10% lead over you, you should attack the frontrunner. And there's so many missed debate opportunities or even social media opportunities to actually bring forward a potential hurdle for said candidate, in this case being Pablo Rodriguez. So we do need someone who is ready to govern, but also who's sort of liked and we want to have a beer with, but at the same time is able to be an attack dog when the situation calls for it. And I know it's quite a bizarre thing to look for in a leadership candidate, right? But I do think you also need a good team around you to get that done, because it's not a solo trip, a political campaign, and let alone a general election campaign.
I I agree with you 100%. I mean, Pablo has the most extensive team. He does, right? Because he has a lot of support from his old writing staff and a lot of people that he's met over the years. I mean, he did do more than what about 20 years in federal politics. It's a lot of time to be an MP, and he only lost one election, which was the Orange Wave in 2011, and then
That's right.
2015 he immediately came back. So the person who's, in terms of experience, who's closest to being able to govern with the resources, with the team, I don't want to say it, but the fact is, it would probably be Pablo. I think it's just a fact. It's not. It's
Well,
not something.
that's not necessarily what I was insinuating, though. I'm talking about, like, when you get elected, you need a good team around you of advisors and doers, right? It
He
just
won't.
cannot be just you. It
No,
could be
I.
Pablo. By the way,
Yeah.
Pablo has experience, right? Let's
Oh,
not say
absolutely.
otherwise.
No, no,
And
absolutely.
actually, I like Pablo because, number one, he knows what the human issues are, and I've said this in the previous episode of our podcast. But he also knows what needs to be done, and he's also a nice guy. He can be funny. He showed throughout the debates he's got the funnier moments. I'm gonna, he can use humor. I just wish he did a better job defending his track record
Yeah.
whenever someone attacks him, right? And he can do it. It's not he's done it before in news interviews in the House, right?
Yeah.
So I think just a little bit of polishing on that. Whereas Jean Milliard, the reason there's this energy, that's exuberance that comes out every time he talks. He talks a very different way. And though I've criticized sometimes, I think he answers questions in a very unique way. I prefer someone who follows the Marshall Gans storytelling rubric, telling human stories that actual people go through, rather than just talking policy, because policy is pretty boring. Well, Elizabeth Warren had a plan for everything. So did Kamala. You got to excite people and get them to listen to you. Otherwise, you're too boring.
I agree.
But in Jean Milliard's case, he's not at all boring. And the way he talks is he identifies what the root of the problem is and then makes a suggestion of what ought to be done about it. And that's what's very refreshing among the leadership candidates. With that in mind, is there a final note you'd like to add in terms of the podcast episode today?
First, I'd like to say thank you for having me here. I mean, I really appreciate that. Provincially, the PLQ has to be careful because there are other federalist parties in Quebec. And there
Okay.
are options for people. If the wind blows too far to one side, it'll come back the other way, right? Whatever goes around comes around. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction.
Okay. From a word of caution to Newton's law. And as an adieu message, thank you, folks, for staying tuned with us and listening to us. This has been Real Talk with Eddie Cara. Till next time.